Edit.
Hey there, this is Professor Eric Lindsay, and this is the second episode in a two-part sequence about harmonic progressions. To begin, let's return to a concept that we introduced back several videos ago, harmonic function. In music, harmonic functions refer to the relationship between chords in a key and the roles that they play within the tonal system. They describe how certain harmonies relate to the tonic chord and how they move in progression to create a sense of tension and resolution. There are three primary harmonic functions, and those are tonic function, dominant function, and subdominant function. In tonic function, this is the chord that's going to feel like home in a key. We count the 1 chord as well as 1/6 as a tonic function chord. The dominant function is going to include chords that create tension and direct energy back towards the tonic. Dominant function chords are going to possess our leading tone, and it's going to possess, ideally, also the other tendency tone, scale degree 4, which is the chordal seventh of the 5/7 chord. So, what are the dominant function chords? 5 and 5/7. And what other chords have our tendency tones in it? 7 diminished and 7 diminished 7 also contain those tendency tones, and for that reason, both 5 and 5/7, as well as 7 and 7 diminished 7, count as dominant function chords. The last one is the subdominant function. You might also hear this sometimes as called predominant function. This function is an intermediate step between the tonic and the dominant, often preparing the listener for the dominant to come. Chords that are subdominant function are most often the 4 chords and the 2 chords. So the most conventional harmonic patterns that we write harmonic progressions around are going to revolve around these functions. And the two main harmonic patterns that we're going to study here are tonic, dominant, tonic progressions and tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic progressions. In common practice tonal music, there are rules about how you can move between these harmonic functions. Tonic function chords can move to subdominant function chords and back, easy peasy. Examples of this might be 1-4-1, or 1-2-6 to 1-6, or 1-4-6-4 to 1. Tonic and dominant function chords can also alternate no problem. 1-7-6 to 1-6, or how about 1-5, 5-6-5 to 1, or 1-5-6 to 1. When we include all three functions, we move like this: 1-4-5-1, or 1-2-6-5-5-7-1, or if we're feeling like we bought a mouthful, 1-1-6-4-2-6-5-5-4-2-1-6. The common harmonic rule that we have in common practice tonality is that we can't move from a dominant function chord to a subdominant function chord. This connects to those voice leading rules that we studied already. The leading tone and the chordal seventh of a 5/7 chord need to resolve to the tonic harmony. And to move to any other chord is to thwart that resolution in an unforgivable way. We call this a retrogression. So that means no 5-4, that means no 7-2. Your ear might say, those chords sound fine to me, and we have tons of rock and pop and blues examples of the 5 chord moving to the 4 chord, and in those contexts, it always sounds lovely. Well, it didn't sound lovely to folks in the 17th and 18th centuries, and that's just the harmonic system that we're studying at the moment. So cherish this sound all you like, just don't include it in any of your theory homework. So you might be wondering, what about the deceptive cadence, which we learned about in a previous video? Deceptive cadences are going to move from 5 to a 6 chord. So that's going to resolve those tendency chords, not to 1, but to 6. Is this allowed? Yes, it's allowed, because look at it, we are going scale degree 7 to 1, we are going scale degree 4 to 3, and largely it's because this voice leading is so smooth, it's considered acceptable, but it's also surprising to us. Hence the deception. And this is why sometimes we can include the 6 chord as a tonic substitute or a tonic prolonging chord. We can also sometimes count a 6 chord as a subdominant function chord. So we'll see that 6, depending on the context of the whole progression, sometimes serving a tonic substitute function, sometimes serving as a subdominant function. The 6 can be in both categories. And lastly, we didn't talk about the 3 chord. To a lesser extent, the 3 chord can sometimes appear as a tonic substitute or a tonic prolonging chord. Now, you might have noticed earlier, when I was playing chords, I'm throwing a different number of chords into these progressions. But regardless of how many chords I'm playing, the general feeling of harmonic flow, the overall sense of direction or goal-oriented motion in these progressions seems similar. And that's because though I'm adding more chords to these progressions, The sequence of harmonic functions in each progression was the same. 1 to 1-6, these are both tonic chords. 4 and 2-6 are both subdominant chords. 5 and 5-4-2 are both dominant function chords. And then we return to 1-6, another tonic function. So even though I had 2 chords per function, this is still an example of a tonic subdominant dominant tonic progression. And to read a chord progression as such is going to elevate our analysis above just labeling Roman numerals to better understanding how these harmonies move and relate to one another. Next, let's analyze a passage of music starting with its Roman numerals, and it'll paint part of the picture about what's going on in the music. Then we're going to analyze the type of harmonic progression that this is, whether it's a tonic dominant tonic progression or a tonic subdominant dominant tonic function. Alright, so the example we have here is Beethoven's Opus 2, number 1, Piano Sonata. And let's figure out the Roman numerals before we figure out the harmonic functions of this passage. So I'm looking and I see the key signature, 4 flats. Take a look at, remember how we identify key signatures. 4 flats is going to be A flat major. Remember, the last flat is scale degree 4. So if I look back at the previous flat, that is the key if we were in a major key, so A flat major. Or think about its relative minor, which is a third beneath A flat, which would be F, so it could be F minor. If I look at the content of what's going on melodically, for this first passage, I see C, F, A flat, C, F, A flat. This is an F minor triad. So I'm kind of thinking that we're probably in F minor, and this opening passage is just our 1 chord. How long does it go? I keep saying F minor triads, and this whole thing is F minor triad, emphasizing that note and that note with this passing motion. I'm thinking this whole thing is 1. If we look at the chord that follows, we have an E natural, G, a B flat, and a C. If we're like, I'm confused, what's that second doing there? Whenever we see a second in a part of the staff, we can also try and imagine, well, what if this top note of the second was moved down? Can we build this whole thing in thirds? So if I move that down and build this whole thing so it was just thirds, this would be a 7th chord built on C, when C in F is our 5 chord, and notice we've raised the leading tone, so that's a major 5, 7. But also, because this is the leading tone in the bass, it's not root position, it is first inversion. That is 5, 6, 5. And then, let's see, does this carry through all the way through these 2 bars? Indeed, that's the same chord for 2 bars, and does the melody outline this as well? C, G, C, E natural, G, B flat, and come back to G again. That's the same principle. So from 1 to 5, 6, 5, then this next one we kind of come back to an F minor triad. It looks like, again, these are 2 important pitches, A flat and F being emphasized in the bar. So it's a return to 1. This next one here, again, we see an interesting space over here of an augmented 4th between this B flat and E natural. If I tried to spell this, if it was just triads, the root of this would be the E natural, our leading tone. That would be our 7th chord. But since we have not the leading tone of the bass, it is in first inversion. This is a 7 diminished 6th. And let's just double check. Do we have the same notes up above? So G, B flat, and E natural. Here's our here's our B flat and our G. So that is the same chord. Followed by this interesting bad boy. We have an F minor triad, but with a second inversion of this one. But we're not going to label it with what's the lowest inversion. We're looking at what's in the bass. And the bass has A flat in the bass. So if it was root position, F would be there, but it's not. It's at first inversion. So this is a 1-6, followed by this guy here again. So B flat and D and G. If I moved that down here to make it root position, that would be a G minor triad. That is our 2 chord, but it's not in root position. It is a diminished triad. Remember, in minor mode, 2 is diminished. It's at first inversion, so that is a 2 diminished 6. And then over here we have this hangout on 1 going down to our leading tone with C and G. So we kind of have this as being a 5 chord, and the fact that we started on scale degree 1 and then moved to 7, I'm going to say this is a 4-3 suspension, which we'll get at in a later video. So that is the Roman numerals. Let's go ahead and give this a listen and see how this sounds before we talk about the harmonic function. The piece sounds like this. All right, so let's start analyzing this from a functional standpoint. The one chord is a tonic chord that then moves to a dominant chord, which then moves back to a tonic chord. Before another dominant chord, before another tonic chord, then interestingly here we introduce our first subdominant chord to a dominant chord. So what kind of progression do we call this? Do we discount these tonic to dominant to tonics as being a unit, and then this dominant to tonic and elsewhere being a unit? We have a thing called harmonic prolongation. The concept of harmonic prolongation is that if we are going from a tonic chord to a dominant chord and back to a tonic chord, this is all within the same phrase, we can consider that this is basically like a neighboring motion that's just keeping this tonic function overall throughout. And the fact that it happens twice, we could say this is a giant prolongation of a tonic all the way throughout this passage that then introduces subdominant here and then creates motion towards the dominant. And if we were to say, what is the flow and the feel of this opening passage? And indeed, it starts off where we're just kind of alternating between tonic and dominant, tonic and dominant. In that way, we're kind of creating stasis. We're not necessarily moving in any kind of destination because we're just alternating between those two chords. It's not until we introduce this subdominant function there that we end up making that drive towards a dominant and we come to rest right here. And this is in fact the location of that first cadence. It's a half cadence, as we discussed in an earlier video. So this is one way of kind of analyzing what happens here. If we didn't look at any of the harmonic function, at best, we could say that there is like a basic idea in the music, and then there's kind of like a response to that idea, and then it continues and builds, and then it comes to rest. When we start thinking about the harmonic functions, we get kind of a clearer picture of when does that sense of drive towards cadence occur. And even though we have an exciting rising of this line all the way through here, and things get kind of faster and faster, and here's our climax, the reason why this feels so climactic and interesting is because this climax comes down towards cadence right when we introduce our subdominant function. So on the whole, we could go ahead and say that this is an example of a tonic, subdominant, dominant progression at a large structural level. Now, we can also apply these rules to your songwriting. Let's say you've written a melody, but you're trying to figure out what chords should go with it. This is a common thing that everyone figures out if they're trying to compose music at some point. So the relationship between a melody and its harmonies, as we've talked about in other videos, has to do with whether the harmonies are based on the most structurally important notes of the melody at any given moment. So, for instance, if my melody starts on C, I can decide to harmonize that C with any chord that also contains a C. C might be the tonic. C might be the chordal third. Or C might be the chordal fifth. If we're feeling saucy, as I encourage you do, C might be the chordal seventh. So if I plan to harmonize this C as it moves to a G, we can harmonize this with a single chord that includes both pitches, like a C major chord, or we can decide to change chords when we leap to the G, such as a G major chord. Notice, though, that these two options sound very different from one another, and that's because the first option, which sounds like we're just beginning an idea, includes a single tonic function chord, assuming that we're in the key of C. The second, which sounds like it implies much more motion, involves a tonic function chord moving to a dominant function chord, and it's this change in function that's responsible for creating this sense of movement. So the choice is up to you. But let's say the melody is going to move to an A afterward, and you want to harmonize it with a 4 chord. We're going to create a retrogression if we move from a dominant chord to a subdominant one. If you want to play by these common practice rules, we can avoid this retrogression by using the tonic function for both of these first few notes, and then moving to the subdominant when the melody moved to A. Does that make sense? Deciding how many beats we hold each chord, such as deciding to have 1 or 2 chords per bar, is called harmonic rhythm. And, like varying harmonic functions, composers will vary the rate of harmonic rhythm in a piece to drive motion towards a cadence or to alternate between feelings of stasis versus movement. Hopefully this gives you some ideas of what's the sort of goal that we're trying to achieve when we're looking at analyzing a score, as well as giving you some inspiration for what to do if you're writing some music of your own. If you have any questions, drop me a line. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in our next video.